Chopping
Okay,
really high.
terrific.
CTV's on the verge. You're on. You're going all the way through.
Okay. Hi, guys. Okay, there.
Is that your theme?
Morning, Dennis. Fascinating yesterday, Dennis. We spent the afternoon in a pedestrian mall downtown, the Calle Florida. The offices of La Nación, one of the country's largest newspapers, are located there. And every day at noon, people gather to look at the headlines, read the latest bit of information that's coming out about the situation on the Malvinas. What we found were people who are passionately involved in this discussion. They stand there. The arguments are heated. The discussions are intense. What they are talking about is the Argentinian commitment, the need to do this. They must. They feel that they are going to fight this war, that they are going to win this war. There's no talk almost anymore of whether or not there will be a fight, only when. Well, the reports late last night here were that, of course, the talks were on the verge of breaking down. In fact, that there were just informal talks there. And the Foreign Minister, Costa Méndez, held a late-night press conference last night to again say that Argentina was looking for a peaceful settlement, but that the British, quote, intransigence was going to prevent that. Again, this morning, we have an interesting bit of news. These bits of information from the military junta are released in press releases throughout the night and picked up. They were saying last night and reported again this morning that a call by the defense minister here in Argentina to the United States for what they call an effective contribution to the peace process. This is a bit of a change from what we can gather in Argentine strategy. Of course, the feelings against the United States are running very high in this country. But what it seems to come down to is President Galtieri, if he is going to agree to a withdrawal at all, will need total American backing, the endorsement of President Reagan on the question of sovereignty, in the sense that sovereignty will be guaranteed. Well, last night again, another fascinating rally. They have been holding masses in Buenos Aires, Dennis. It's tribute in a way to the dead and the wounded, those already dead and wounded in the battle so far. What happened last night was that it was a Peronist-sponsored mass, and it turned into a bit of a rally. Of course, the Peronist Party is outlawed. It's illegal in this country, and some are suggesting that they were using the mass as a mechanism to hold an illegal political rally. This is presenting some problems for General Galtieri. The Peronists, of course, have been in power 3 times in this country, tossed out all 3 times by the military junta. They are they still have a fair amount of popular support in the country. If Galtieri appears to be losing a grip on the Malvinas, if he appears to be backing down on the question of war and battle and preservation of the Malvinas for Argentina, I think that you will see a resurgence of some of these parties. And again, of course, there were some reports that by June 30th, the military junta would consider allowing political parties in this country to become, quote, legal, and also a communique from the junta saying that they would consider presidential elections in 1983. However, only military candidates would be allowed to run. We can't seem to get confirmation on that. There has been some denial of British troops landing on the Malvinas themselves, but the information is very sketchy. The junta, the military junta, doles out information in bits and pieces, telexes that are posted on the Foreign Ministry information board, and that's about all you get. There are certain interviews with government officials, but they are generally low level, low ranking, and one can never be sure that you're getting the latest up-to-date position of the junta. There's in fact a growing sentiment here that war is imminent in general, and that the British are capable of anything. There's a fair amount of, we'll use the word propaganda, that the British troops surrounding the Falklands are mistreating the islanders on the Falkland Islands, on the Malvinas. The kind of information we got from people yesterday when we spoke on the streets were that the British were being desperate in their attacks. The pictures, I'm sure you've seen them. Margaret Thatcher is being portrayed in newspapers and magazines here as a witch, a vampire, a pirate. The feelings are very strong, and I'm sure, of course, that this information is being, in part at least, put out by the junta to prepare people psychologically for the advent of war. Dennis, I was astounded. We found a lot of it yesterday. It seems that we are tarred by the American brush, and worse yet, some tar us with the British brush. We heard reports yesterday from people that our foreign policy is no different than that set by the United States, that when Alexander Haig says jump, we say how high. There were other comments that, of course, as part of the Commonwealth, we would follow follow British suit totally. So we are not as popular as we have been up to date in this country. Good to talk to you, Dennis.
Last night, Foreign Minister Costa Méndez was said to be ready to go to New York at a moment's notice to help finalize a possible UN-negotiated peace settlement. But chances for peace seem to be fading by the hour, and in Spanish, Costa Méndez declared that any breakdown in negotiations would be due to British inflexibility. In English, he was even more to the point.
Do you blame Great Britain for intransigence, Mr. Costa?
Yeah, yes.
On Argentine television, the public is constantly reminded its forces are ready to fight the British. And that line of defiance is reflected in this morning's headlines. Argentina will accept no ultimatums, a reference to reports here that Britain told Argentina that it had 48 hours to accept London's terms for peace. This morning, Argentines are being prepared to accept the possible loss of life if war should break out, and the loss of money. An Argentine economist is predicting that if hostilities last a month or two, then this nation's inflation rate could soar by 200%. Bob Berkowitz, ABC News, Buenos Aires.
British ships have pulled back far enough that seem to be. Oh, really? Where did that come from?
There was a town military
Oh,
sources
yeah.
that so
Out of
far
the out of artillery range, which would mean that the
British are also out of range. I think.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Look up, just for a second. Okay, that's fine. Are you still rolling? Okay, we have speed anytime you're.
Okay. The government news agency here has just reported that British ships have pulled back from the Falkland Islands, at least out of range of the artillery located on the Falkland Islands. This would mean that the British ships would also be far back in, and let me start this over. The government news agency here reports this morning that the British ships have pulled back somewhat from the Falkland Islands, at least far enough back that they are out of range of the artillery located on the islands. This would mean that the ships would be too far away from the islands to shell them with their own cannon. There have been reports from time to time of British shelling on the island. The Argentine Foreign Minister, I'm going to just do it one more time. The government press agency here reported just a while ago that the Argentine press agency here reported just a while ago that the British ships have now pulled back somewhat from the Falkland Islands, at least far enough back that they are now out of range of the land-based artillery on the islands. This would suggest that the ships are now too far away to shell the islands, as they've been doing from time to time. The significance of this is not yet clear. It moved on the government wire service just a few minutes ago. Last night, the Argentine Foreign Minister Costa Méndez held a brief news conference and said Argentina still wants to negotiate, still wants to support the peace efforts going on at the United Nations. Just what is left to talk about is not entirely clear, but Costa Méndez says Argentina is not ready to break off the talks. He also suggested that he might go to New York later on to join in the talks. He said at this time there are no plans to do so, but suggested if new developments warrant, he might be willing to join in the talks going on there. This suggests that if a British invasion of the islands appears imminent. Okay, I'll take it one more time. Okay. The government press agency here reported just a few minutes ago that Get it here. The government press agency here reported just a little while ago that the British ships have now pulled back from the island somewhat, at least far enough back that they are out of range of the land-based artillery on the Falkland Islands. This would suggest that the ships are now too far back to shell the islands with their own cannon, as they've done from time to time. The significance of this is not yet clear. The government press agency reported it without comment. Last night, the Argentine Foreign Minister Costa Méndez said here in a brief news conference that Argentina wants to continue with the negotiations at the United Nations. He did not say whether there is anything left to talk about, only that Argentina wants to continue talking as long as the Secretary General thinks it would be helpful. Some military sources here are suggesting that what the British really want is to make an invasion of the islands, establish a beachhead there, and then talk about a ceasefire. Until then, the sources here are convinced the British invasion will probably happen. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Buenos Aires. Did that make sense, that last? It didn't. Let me do this one more time. I didn't like that. Okay. The government press agency reported here just a little while ago that British ships have pulled back somewhat from their positions around the Falkland Islands, at least far enough back that they are now out of range of the land-based artillery that the Argentines have on the islands. This would suggest that the ships are also too far away to carry out shelling of the islands with their own cannon. The significance of this is not entirely clear. The government press agency moved the item just a few minutes ago and reported it without comment. On the diplomatic front, the Argentine Foreign Minister Costa Méndez said last night that Argentina is not yet ready to break off the negotiations at the United Nations. Costa Méndez said that Argentina wants to continue with the talks as long as the UN Secretary General thinks that they will be helpful. What he did not say is whether there is anything left to really talk about. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Buenos Aires. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, look at the tape for me. I saw some electronic jitter in the picture. It seemed to come from the camera. We saw it on a monitor here, but I don't know if you have it.
That's if you keep it short and simple.
Well, that's right. That's kind of a new low.
It may, Gaia, you got a little 12-inch Sony here, so I don't know. It may have just been a disturbance on the monitor. Susie, is there anything else? Looking very hard. That's right, yeah. You just staggered them. It's okay? All right, I didn't see that. All right, you happy, Bob?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, yeah, that is all. Okay, take care of yourself. Ron, CBS.
Zie? De Argentijnse regering heeft de bezittingen van Engelse en Britse ondernemingen in Argentinië geblokkeerd. De maatregel is volgens de minister van Economische Zaken, Roberto Aleman, genomen om de kapitaalvlucht naar het buitenland tegen te gaan. Britse ondernemingen mogen normaal in Argentinië blijven functioneren, maar ze zullen onder directe controle van de staat komen te staan. Niet voor Britten en van Engeland.
Ahí va.
Hola, ¿qué anda y todo?
Claro,
Por
vale.
primera vez el disparador, ¿no?
¿Funciona? Revisalo.
Dejen pasar este camión que pasa. Wat? De Argentijnse regering heeft de bezittingen van Britten en van Engelse ondernemingen in Argentinië geblokkeerd. De maatregel is genomen om kapitaalvlucht naar het buitenland tegen te gaan. De Argentijnse regering heeft de bezittingen van Engelse en Britse ondernemingen in Argentinië geblokkeerd. De maatregel is volgens de minister van Economische Zaken, Roberto Aleman, genomen om kapitaalvlucht naar het buitenland tegen te gaan. Engelse ondernemingen in Argentinië mogen normaal blijven functioneren, maar ze zullen onder directe controle van de staat komen te staan. En Engelsen die eigendommen in Argentinië bezitten, kunnen er niet vrij over beschikken. Dat wil zeggen dat ze hun bezit bijvoorbeeld niet kunnen verkopen. De maatregel geldt niet voor Engelsen... Nee, ze hebben
¿Qué?
Ja. Zie? De Argentijnse regering heeft de bezittingen van Engelse en Britse ondernemingen in Argentinië geblokkeerd. De maatregel is volgens de minister van Economische Zaken, Roberto Aleman, genomen om de kapitaalvlucht naar het buitenland tegen te gaan. Britse ondernemingen mogen normaal in Argentinië blijven functioneren, maar ze zullen onder directe controle van de staat komen te staan. En Engelsen die bezit in Argentinië hebben, kunnen er niet meer vrij over beschikken. Dat wil zeggen dat ze hun eigendom bijvoorbeeld niet kunnen verkopen. De maatregel geldt niet voor Britse ingezetenen in Argentinië, maar wel voor alle grote bedrijven en banken. De maatregel is afgekondigd op wat vermoedelijk de vooravond is van een gewapend en bloedig conflict tussen Engeland en Argentinië. In Buenos Aires gaan de betogingen voor de Argentijnse soevereiniteit over de Malvinas-eilanden door. De peronistische beweging hield een mis ter nagedachtenis van de gesneuvelde soldaten. Het was de tweede keer sinds de bezetting van de eilanden dat de peronisten, de grootste politieke beweging in Argentinië, weer openlijk op straat demonstreerden. Ze riepen leuzen zoals: de Malvinas zijn van Argentinië en het volk is van Perón. Zoiets is onder het militaire bewind dat Argentinië bestuurt jarenlang ondenkbaar geweest. Maar de Malvinas-kwestie heeft alles in Argentinië anders gemaakt.
Tengo esta, son nuestras, si no se toca. Si no, esta que te regalo, bueno, esta me...
The Argentine president, General Galtieri, arrived for an emergency meeting with his military chiefs, looking as grim as the prevailing mood in Buenos Aires. Most of the signs point to war with Britain. After the meeting, Foreign Minister Dr. Costa Méndez accused Mrs. Thatcher of what he called absolute intransigence. He argued that failure of the United Nations talks would be all her fault.
The situation in English is that we are negotiating and that the Secretary General of the United Nations is still acting as a negotiator and is talking to the parties. And we will continue the negotiations as long as the Secretary General think possible to obtain something.
Argentine President, General Galtieri, arrived for an emergency meeting with his military chiefs, looking as grim as the prevailing mood in Buenos Aires. Most of the signs point to war with Britain. After the meeting, Foreign Minister Dr. Costa Méndez accused Mrs. Thatcher of what he called absolute intransigence. He argued that failure of the United Nations talks would be all her fault.
The situation in English is that we are negotiating and that the Secretary General of the United Nations is still acting as a negotiator and is talking to the parties. And we will continue the negotiations as long as the Secretary General think possible to obtain something positive.
Judged from Buenos Aires, war seems almost inevitable. The junta wants to pass all the blame on to Britain, but there are no signs they're preparing the Argentine people for compromise and a peaceful solution. Everything points the other way.
Ships have put to sea after refueling. At Argentine military bases, along the Argentine coast, the armed forces are preparing for the worst. Ships have put to sea after refueling. At Argentine military bases, troops are on full alert. The British fleet is reported to be in battle formation off the Falklands, but Argentine military sources reckon foul weather could prevent an immediate British attack on the islands. The prospect of a helicopter landing has been described here as a suicide mission during current conditions. Away from the television propaganda in a Buenos Aires church, they've been mourning the 400 Argentines who've died in the conflict. Some people have criticized the president for offering to sacrifice 40,000 lives. They say enough is enough. After the Mass, the congregation erupted into a display of political passion and national fervor. These members of the Peronist party don't support military rule, but for the moment they're behind the junta in its conflict with Britain. On Argentine television, viewers are being prepared psychologically for war.